We've invited Jason Glaser, Executive Director of La Isla Network, an incredible organization, to share about worker heat protection in New Mexico. And I will follow up, Jason, after your presentation to say how you can get involved. We have an incredible opportunity to protect workers. We had hoped by this heat season, in fact, we had hoped by last heat season, a hearing has been rescheduled for September 21st. And we've got our work to do this summer to get people to take action voluntarily and hopefully in the future with a mandate. But Jason Glover, please, we're so glad you're here.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. And I mean, thanks to the counselor and all the work and the engagement with the senator. That's wonderful. Like to see. Um, I'm gonna try not to speak too fast. Probably have too many slides. I'm gonna like paraphrase Mark Twain. If I had more time, there'd be fewer slides. But trying to respect everybody's language base, I'll try to speak as slowly as is viable. But I think it's important to understand where La Isla Network learned about heat stress. And while it's a very different setting, there's a lot of value in learning in the most extreme setting. And it's hard to beat sugarcane in Central America. And I'm sure there's some folks attending who had family or from the region, who had family that did these jobs and know exactly how unbelievably brutal it is. So, these guys work 12-hour days, no protections, no water, no shade, no hydration, certainly no provision of isotonic or electrolyte beverages. And so we built a transdisciplinary research network to address that and have worked a lot with the media. I mean, honestly, if you saw any work on heat stress and interventions in The Guardian or The Atlantic over the last 5 to 7 years, it's a good chance we were behind it. We like to be in the shadows sometimes and out front when it's useful, but we have really great contacts with the media landscape, and we've tried to push these things forward before they were really being taken seriously. And one of the outcomes that's really extreme, obviously, is the mortality of a heat stroke. But what we've learned now is both from chronic exposure and acute events like an acute heat stroke, which leads to acute kidney injury from an exertional heat stroke, is kidney disease. And we're seeing that this is an issue in the US among the workforce. There's been articles out of Texas and the DC area of people that seem to be getting ill now. We actually, if you can believe it, have an NIH NIDDK fully funded project with Turner Construction right now over 4 years to look at this in the US workforce at a massive work site where we can actually track the population. So it's a really extreme outcome, but it was instructive. And the knock-on effects both on the public system, for the senator, I mean, this is important, preventative, either acute kidney dialysis from acute kidney injury or long-term chronic care. We don't need to be adding that to our public health costs. It would be much more important to invest in protection and prevention. Really briefly about us, actually just check out the website. Let's keep moving. So this is going to be a bit remedial for some folks, but when you think about heat stress, it's not just the heat. And keep that in mind, because a lot of the current standards that are being proposed are just on the environmental exposure. And we really have to take into account what people are doing in that heat. And then I would argue what people are making you do in that heat. Because yes, we know it's hot. We know the work is hard. But agency, I would say, is probably one of the biggest exposures. And we have to think about creatively how to regulate on that. I am not sure what the exact answer is yet, but it is really, when we see, and we'll get to this, one of the main issues is, do you have the agency to take care of yourself and listen to your body? Or are you forced through piece rate or other demands? And we're blessed with this wonderful frontal cortex that lets us think and make decisions, but also allows us to push through when an animal would say, hey, I'm done, and listen to their body. But that's why marathon runners can do what they do. It's why sugarcane cutters can cut 6 to 9 tons. And it's why a roofing crew in New Mexico might just want to push on through the day because they have another contract to get to. And I think that's something we really have to take into account. And obviously there's these other risks, and it's certainly not just sugarcane, right? We work in infrastructure. We've actually done some assessment studies in New Mexico with road crews with my good friend Fabiano, who I think a lot of you know, and who's on the Turner project and an IDDK project with us. Construction, obviously, with the work we're doing stateside, and then agriculture overall. But let's not forget about indoor work. I don't know what happened out there, but man, when we see the literature, everybody talks about outdoor workers. Indoor workers are also at risk. Again, if the Venn diagram looks anything. Oh, I don't know why it's looks like anything like this, where there's high heat, heavy workload, and insufficient labor protections. These are people we have to be concerned about. I don't care if they're in a manufacturing center. I don't care if they're, working in a warehouse, but let's not forget about them. And I'm sure none of you have, but we do see that if you notice in the news coverage and also the lit in academia. This is really important to understand, though, right? It's not just heat stroke. It's not just that early mortality. It's not that chronic or acute kidney damage only. All cause injuries, work loss injuries go up as it gets hotter. This is a wonderful study done by an Isla Network member, Barak Al-Ahmad, also at Harvard. I think a lot of you know Barak. He's wonderful. He's stuck in Kuwait right now. And actually, I was supposed to teach his class at Harvard Friday, but they're on strike. So the world's a mess. I'm coming from the Hudson Valley right now, not from Boston. But you can see in all these sectors, the risk goes up really significantly, and obviously in ag, construction, manufacturing, warehousing. Now, why accommodation and food services go down? These are pretty sophisticated companies that report into OSHA. We think that's simply air conditioning. We're going to look more into it. Utilities is a question mark, but really all across the other trades and industries, injuries overall go up. So people are in harm's way as it gets hotter. And now we finally have data to prove it. We've known this instinctively for a long time because, as you guys heard, you get really confused and that's going to lead to falling off ladders. And that gets, documented as a fall or cutting yourself, et cetera, right? The other thing is, industry employers are leaving money on the table. And this is not a model. This is from multiple sites and multiple industries in multiple countries. We correlated all this data, my good friend Andreas Flores, and we saw the impact of heat on productivity, and it just drops down precipitously. About every degree over 25 Celsius, I'm sorry I don't have the Fahrenheit if anyone wants to chime in. Off the top of my head, I was anglicized in my British education, sorry. But about every degree over 25 C, and if anybody in the chat can help me out, you're losing about 0.5 to 2% of your productivity. And that's really impactful over time. So money's on the table needlessly, lives are at risk. Good resource. I just want to throw this up there. Andreas, who I just mentioned, also an LIN member. He's the author of that great ILO report. So many resources in there for everybody. I'm sure many of you know, but I will be a little tough on the ILO. Most of the reports aren't this good. This is a really good report. It's engaging, informative, and useful. But I think it's because it came out of researchers who both do lab and field work. But let's talk about what some of our challenges are when we're thinking about what to do about it. And one of the main things we want to do is keep that core body temperature down. I think that's been really well addressed by the people who did the emergency care. Also, just amazing work. Like, thank you, thank you, thank you. It was great to see that. Really heartening. But why do we want to keep that core body temp down? Hydration is important, but you can take hydration when you take breaks to keep your core body temperature down. And you can be completely hydrated and drop dead of a heat stroke, which wasn't really common knowledge until more recently. But here's the problem, guys. If we look at like the guidance that we are told to look at, ACGIH or NIOSH, and we look at environmental temperatures, and this is in the tropics in Latin America, but this would also apply to Louisiana in the summer, New Mexico in the summer, you would actually have to stop work for most of the year in that middle thick line around 9 or 10 a.m. for anywhere from a half hour to 45 minutes an hour. And that is operationally unviable. And when U.S. Army or Air Force try to do this, they have green flag and black flag days using a similar system of workload. This is very high workload as sugarcane workers and exertional in the break time. They have green flag and black flag days, but they'll tell you at an Air Force base in Georgia, just as many planes take off on a green flag day as a black flag day, meaning regulations that don't work, standards that don't work lead to delinquency and then nothing happens. And that's actually more dangerous. So as much as we're hungry for legislation, I think we got some work ahead of us, and I'm going to get into that. And then if you look at like when they do kick in, they kick in too late. And that agrees with our data, the military data. People show up when they're hot enough, working hard enough, and it's warm enough out. Before guidance kicks in, they're already too hot, then they're ending up in the ER pretty early or worse. The midday work bans, I mean, they almost don't merit discussion. They don't work. They're kind of almost flippant. And then my concern about the OSHA guidance is it's only based on our dry bulb, right? Our mercury temperature. They're arbitrary might be a tough word, but they're just kind of thrown out there, 80 and 50. The guidance is really broad. And there was no trial period to see if any of this actually reduces risk or is viable. So my concern about all the guidance that we see out there is it tends to be both over and under protective. And if we look to other countries, you kind of see very quickly on this table, it's just all over the map. And if people want to say, oh, well, it's about acclimatization in Saudi Arabia, that's why it kicks in later than Austria, well, then compare Austria and Belgium and explain this to me. They should be fairly similar. But also, you acclimatize during a warm season in the summer. So none of the rationale really makes sense. And I hate to be a Debbie Downer or a Daniel Downer. I don't want to be sexist about it. It's really just not where we need to be yet. And it's because we're not coordinating between labor, industry, and regulators. So what did we do about it? We tried to figure this out looking at long-term data, and we got a system going in a formerly very badly behaving sugar mill, and we worked on rest, shade, hydration, cooling. You could replace rest and shade with cooling, breaks, hydration, and sanitation, right? Improving heat stress prevention treatment practices, emergency care. Organizational culture is a huge part of it, right? It's not so much the heat and the humidity, but the guys making you do work in it. So we did a big org psych and CAP assessment. I think that can help employers figure out where they may have barriers in their own org. If top management is on board, you might have some middle managers who just don't buy it and need some training or replacing. And you might want to understand where the workers might view that there might be barriers. What we basically had to do, and it's unique, is look at core body temperature and long-term health outcomes and outputs like productivity and ROI over time, observationally, year on year, and try to get to a point where we're reducing the risk and harm, maintaining or improving productivity. And frankly, we were willing to take a hit on productivity if we needed to protect lives, and if was there an ROI. And over time, we were able to demonstrate with the high workloads, introduce these breaks and the medium workloads. And I want you to pay attention about the amount of time, 16% a day for medium workloads, which is most jobs, most construction jobs, most of the jobs we're going to be concerned about in New Mexico are going to kind of fall in here. You saw that cane cutter. Most people aren't working at that level 9 hours a day stateside. Now, there are some, and we need to accommodate for them. But it's a really specific and nasty setting. So look at that 60%, put a pin in that. Core elements, they're basic, right? Schedule breaks, think about logistics, make sure the cooling areas are close in a field setting, make sure those things are portable so people aren't wandering to a shade tent that's like now a click off of their work site, and they're using their break to just get to the break. Obviously, potable water is a concern, I think probably a concern in parts of New Mexico on agricultural settings. And then hygiene, if you have women in the workforce and you are asking them to drink water, give them a safe place, at least a sensible place to use the bathroom. Little things, right? These are like fundamentals, but like we can't forget them. And then we have to think about acclimatization. I think we touched on that. I don't want to like keep getting into it, but the idea of that May 1st arbitrary date is kind of up there with the arbitrary dry bulb temperature, right? What if you have an earlier heat wave? Well, those people's bodies are just as much physiological risk as the guy before or after May 1st. So acclimatization is really important. This is when we get into trouble, right? And these heat waves are happening earlier and later in the season. And that's when we've seen deaths in Europe and the US. Obviously, the Pacific Northwest has had major problems with the apple harvest. Heat waves are hitting late. It's really germane. And what we did there, the why you need acclimatization, I will share these slides so you guys can dig into these reasons more. But the considerations also, if people are shifting jobs, they're coming back from sick leave, when a heat wave happens, it's not uniform. You need to have this operational flexibility and knowledge. So we did the same thing we did with the breaks. We went in and we measured people's core body temp and their outputs, and we developed an 8-day acclimatization system. And you could basically replace all these job categories with workload categories to make it applicable to New Mexico. So like you would have like high, medium, low, and have a similar framework, both for the breaks and acclimatization. Like we are this close. We just need access to the sites and the ability to show what's possible, and that should feed into regulation. So that's cool because the old acclimatization system was also kind of not reachable. It was like 14 days, and it came out of South African mines in the 1920s. So, maybe we need to update it. And at 14 days, like that's going to be half your harvest sometimes. I don't want to dive into this too much. You guys did such a good job about talking about the difference between classic and exertional heat stroke. Well done. This used to be one of our bugbears and our frustrations. but they're different. Like you actually do sweat when you have an exertional heat stroke. So the things that we were taught growing up about red dry skin are not applicable. The outcomes are very different. The kidney is disproportionately affected with exertional heat stroke. It's a different population generally. Both are important, I think, on the community level. But again, you guys did such a great job. We developed this with the Air Force. It's in play in the Air Force now. It's in play in the sites that we worked. But I think what you guys put together is equitable. If you'd like to steal it, do it. If you think yours is better, I don't disagree. It's also really great. But it gets to this idea of like helping people understand how to respond and what's important and harm reduction versus perfection. So what did we pull off with this? And I think is applicable. We reduced those kidney declines in that workforce. We decreased the hospitalizations due to heat stroke. We raised productivity and we got an ROI. And I think that's really key, right? There's money on the table if you're not doing this, both in the public and the private. But we've got to remember implementation. How do we support implementation is key. No intervention site, insufficient intervention site, center of excellence. We basically were able to eliminate it after that first year with those initial results. But implementation is really about how do you provide guidance and something that's both general and specific to the different industries. This is about hospitalizations. It's kind of in the weeds, but we basically also eliminated that and did eliminate it in the medium workloads and nearly completely eliminated it right in this low resource, high intensity setting in Mesoamerica.
Great.
Um,
Jason, can you wrap
yeah,
up in a
yeah,
minute? That would be
totally.
great.
Yeah. And then this is the productivity. Guess what? When you take care of people, their productivity per hour goes up. You get an ROI, low regulatory environment, lower staff turnover, lower absenteeism. These are the reasons for the ROI. Nobody's getting sued or regulated on in this setting. So the ROI is probably healthier back home. It's fast. It's within a couple of years. You get other gains when you do this, right? We have paid sick leave. We have routine data capture. This is at a farm in Nicaragua. And this is just what I want to end on. If we think this is possible back home, this is a construction in Turner. We measured everybody's workload last year and continued for the next 3 years. When you have agency, workers in these jobs, roofers, installers, HVAC, the toughest jobs, they're breaking when they have agency about 16 to 70% of the day anyhow. So the arguments we hear from industry is like, oh, it's going to cost us too much money. Wait. Nope. Doesn't agree with the data. It's as much as we care about workload and the environmental temperature, we need to think about management. And so just to end, I do think it's possible to introduce guidance that's actually going to work. We need to model it. We need to validate it. We adjust it together. We socialize it. And ideally, you get to a policy-making dialogue that is not adversarial and you have brought people along. So if we could do it in a sugarcane mill in Nicaragua with those dynamics, I sure as hell hope we can do it in New Mexico. Yeah. So I hope that was useful. You guys are great. I feel like I'm finally with peers. It's so great. It's so great to see where you guys have taken this. It's
And
wild.
we're grateful. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Jason. We're grateful to stand on the shoulders of the work you did. And it's so powerful to work with an organization and then actually demonstrate that productivity, right, with good heat management and support practices can thrive. I just
Yeah,
want to
it's not an either or. That's like a real false dichotomy that people of certain persuasions keep shoving out there.
absolutely. And I have to say, from a public health perspective, while I appreciate you emphasizing voluntary, what we also know is that voluntary is great for many businesses, and other employers need help and support with realistic, effective guidelines so that indeed they can provide shade, right? That's close by, water. So many of our farm workers, people in the oil and gas field, people working outdoor in construction have to provide their own potable water, rest breaks as appropriate, and acclimatization guidelines because people don't know. Employers, businesses don't necessarily know. And those who do, it is a struggle. Profit, we know, is a real motivator. So here in New Mexico, we are very much working on a worker heat protection rule. The hearing is set for September, and I just want to encourage all of you, and I'll put it in the chat, to go to safework4all.org. We have 61 organizations, 2,000 signatures on a petition. Our environment department in New Mexico has worked extraordinarily hard with input from Jason's team, La Isla Network, Fabiano Amarin at UNM, Barak Al-Ahmed, some incredible researchers to develop an evidence-based public health approach that is realistic for our businesses and industries to implement. And it does require written heat plans, again, acclimatization protocols, recording and reporting when heat-related incidents. So we want to encourage all of you today, now, to go to Safe Work for All, sign the petition saying we want a strong worker heat protection rule in New Mexico. We have the opportunity to model that education and training that's required in appropriate languages that workers speak, retaliation protections, and then, of course, we are looking for workers to share their stories. It's a very difficult environment right now, as we all know, for that to happen. So New Mexico's on the front lines of this work. There are six states, I don't count one of them, 7 states, and recent research from California shows that when strong worker protections are in place from the state OSHA, lives are saved. They've seen a tremendous reduction in worker injuries and fatalities. So I encourage any of you who are interested in this work, we're going to be developing a pool of educational resources, including La Isla's work, so that workplaces this summer don't have to wait to do the right thing and make sure their workers are protected.